Ruy Lopez. The Ruy Lopez, also known as the Spanish opening, is one of those chess openings that's been around longer than your grandma's favorite recipe. This thing is ancient, but has been played in many top-level events, from World Chess Championships to PogChamps. The Ruy Lopez starts after the moves e4 e5, knight f3 knight c6, and bishop b5. White fights for the control of the central d4 and e5 squares, and indirectly threatens the black e5 pawn by attacking its only defender. Black, on the other hand, has a hard time getting an advantage in this opening, and some people refer to it as the Spanish torture. Bongcloud. Bongcloud is a meme opening where white disrespects black by moving the king up on the second move of the game. This opening was popularized by Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura, who played the Bongcloud every game and reached 3,000 elo on chess.com, a feat held by less than 40 people in the entire freaking world.
And there we go. Oh yeah.
Magnus Carlsen later also adopted this opening and played it in big tournaments. The game ended in a draw, which reminds me of a quote: "Chess when played perfectly, is a draw." Intercontinental ballistic missile. The intercontinental ballistic missile is a ballistic missile with a range greater than 5,500 kilometers.
That's quite big.
Primarily designed to smash your opponent's queen and make the opponent's king wifeless. The opening starts with knight f3 d5, and then sacrificing the pawn. After a bunch of provoking moves, we finally get to this position where white sacrifices the knight to fork black's rook and queen. Taking seems like the only reasonable option, so black takes. And there goes the wife. Fool's mate. Fool's mate is the checkmate delivered after the fewest possible moves from the game's starting position. Like this.
Are you winning, son?
She's not gonna see this fucking coming.
Najdorf. The Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense is one of the most popular, reputable and deeply studied of all chess openings. The key idea for black is to control the d5 square, while the a6 pawn move prevents white from easily advancing on the b5 square. This opening has been a dangerous weapon for many world champions, and Hikaru also loves it too.
So many top grandmasters played it for so long, and it is such a solid idea, such a solid opening. Even now, 20 years later, everybody plays it without a doubt. For me, I think I would put it at the very top of legendary. I think
if you're a beginner though, don't play this opening as Lovey hates it.
Why? Why are you a beginner trying to play the Najdorf?
Berlin defense. The Berlin defense is a defense against the Ruy Lopez, where black develops the other knight to f6, attacking white's central pawn. The most common continuation is the castling of the white king, and black smashes the pawn. This variation leads to an equal wifeless middle game where Garry Kasparov couldn't penetrate and lost his classical world champ trophy against Kramnik after 15 years of holding the title. Grünfeld. The Grünfeld defense is a hypermodern opening that starts with d4, knight f6, c4 g6, knight c3 d5. The key concept behind the Grünfeld is to allow white to build a big white center, which black aims to undermine with pieces. This opening is a fantastic choice for people like Magnus Carlsen or Hikaru Nakamura. But for beginners like most of you mother***s who are watching, don't even think about playing this opening as it's too complicated, and your butt will be kicked. King's Indian defense. The King's Indian defense is a super aggressive opening and can be played against pretty much any opening. This has been confirmed by Chess Page 1.
The King's Indian setup can be played against e4, d4, knight f3, literally anything.
This is a perfect opening if you're a black Indian. If you're a white Indian though, you can't play this opening as that would be racist. The King's Indian usually starts with the same setup where black builds a big black cozy home, and lets white control the center. After some maneuvering, we usually see white launching attacks on the queen side while black shoves pawns and pieces down the king side. King's Indian attack. For those of you white Indians out there, this is a perfect opening for you. Not only are you able to play a very aggressive and exciting opening, but you also remain super woke and keep your white supremacy down. The opening looks almost exactly like the King's Indian defense, but on the opposite side. Sicilian defense. This opening starts with e4 c5 and quickly goes into wildly different variations like the Najdorf variation, Smith-Morra gambit, and closed Sicilian. This opening is one of the most complex openings in chess, but always give black a fighting chance. If you're under 2000 elo though, you should not play it. Petrov. The Petrov is a not so common opening, especially at lower levels. The Petrov starts by white playing e4 e5, knight to f3, and knight to f6, counterattacking the e4 pawn. This opening is dry AF, and is used by top-level players to force a draw as black. During the World Chess Championship in 2021, Ian Nepomniachtchi played this opening too much, and made Magnus Carlsen tired of competing and gave up his title. Queen's Gambit. The Queen's Gambit is one of the most popular openings out there. It starts by playing d4 d5 and then c4, seemingly throwing away a pawn, and thus the gambit part in the name. However, if black takes on c4, he's kind of f***ed, as white gets a huge development advantage and will inevitably regain that pawn. A better and more common way to handle this opening as black is to play the Queen's Gambit declined, by playing moves such as e6 or c6. Martial attack. The martial attack is an incredibly dangerous opening in the Ruy Lopez. It begins by playing d5 in this position. At the cost of one singular pawn, black can get a huge attack that will leave white trembling if he doesn't know the theory. Italian. The Italian is one of the most popular openings as white. It is a very principled opening as it develops two pieces in rapid manner, while also pressuring black's position. One of its main strengths is that it is really simple to play, and the moves just play themselves. This was actually my main opening until I reached 1800 ELO. At 1800 ELO, I switched to play the Bongcloud, and immediately after a month, I gained -500 ELO. Catalan. The Catalan is an incredibly solid opening. It starts by playing d4 d5, and then white goes for a kingside fianchetto setup. Later in the middle game, white will try to open up the center in order to activate the g2 bishop. If you want a chill and interesting game without too much risk, this is the perfect opening for you. English. The English opening is a flexible and strategic chess opening that begins with the move c4. A fun fact about this opening is that it can transpose to other openings easily. For example, if black plays e5, then it is a Sicilian with white. This opening can be really useful to trick your opponents into playing the opening you really want to play by transposing. Nimzo-Larsen attack. The Nimzo-Larsen attack was most notoriously played by the Grandmaster Bent Larsen in the 90s, and then later on by Fischer. The opening starts with b3 following the hypermodern school of chess, where the center is controlled by pieces instead of pawns. It is a simple opening where white fianchettos the queen's bishop and controls the board from afar. Tarrasch French. The Tarrasch French is a variation that white chooses in the French. It starts by playing e4 e6, d4 d5, and then knight to d2. Although the knight move is unnatural as it blocks the d2 bishop, the objective is to protect the center with c3 if black plays c5 as it is normal in the French defense, and also to avoid any nasty pins that could happen if the knight were on c3. Nimzo-Indian defense. The Nimzo-Indian defense is a chess opening that starts with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. Black pins white's knight to pressure the center and control the board. It is a very solid opening but still keep things spicy, leading to rich and complex positions. Slav. The Slav defense is a variant of the Queen's Gambit decline that arises from playing c6 in the Queen's Gambit. It focuses on reinforcing the d5 pawn with the c6 pawn, aiming for a strong and flexible position. The Slav defense allows black to develop pieces easily while maintaining a solid pawn structure, making it a popular choice for players who prefer a more methodical and defensive approach. This opening often leads to balanced positions with rich strategic possibilities. Sicilian Dragon. The Sicilian Dragon is one of the most popular choices by black in the Sicilian. It is an opening with only one purpose: destruction. If white decides to castle queenside, the game will become a bloody battlefield that only one person gets out alive. Caro-Kann. The Caro-Kann defense is an extremely solid and defensive chess opening where black aims to challenge the center on the second move with d5, whilst maintaining a strong pawn structure. If someone plays this opening against you, expect a longer game as it is hard to win quickly due to the solid nature of black's setup. Reti opening. The Reti opening has its own name for literally no reason. It starts by playing knight to f3 and, yeah, that's it. That's the whole opening right there, I ain't not joking. In fact, most of the time, it actually transposes into real openings. For example, if black plays c5, white plays e4, and we are in a Sicilian. If black plays d5 and we play d4, we can reach a Catalan if we play g3, and bishop to g2. Thus the Reti opening is basically a way to wait and see what black does to decide what you want to do. London system. The London system is one of the most solid but boring AF opening on earth. No matter what your opponent plays, you always get to a setup that looks like this. This is good for beginners, but for intermediate players out there, seriously bro, play something more exciting. Scotch. The Scotch is an aggressive opening by white that aims to open the position as fast as possible and bring a fight to the board. By challenging the center early on, black is forced to choose between defending the pawn or capturing on d4. In either cases there's a way for white to smash black. French defense. The French is a decently popular opening by black that arises from playing the quiet e6 move after white plays the mainstream e4. With this move, black allows white to claim the center with both pawns in order to challenge it with d5. A lot of the time, black will also play c5 and pressure the d4 pawn and f6 to develop his knight to a favorable square. One thing to remember is that the battle revolves around controlling the e5 square. Dutch defense. It is called a defense, but it acts more like an attack. By playing f5 on the first move, the king is weak, which makes this opening risky. However, this move allows black to go nuts if needed, as after castling, the f-pawn is not on the 7th rank but on the 5th. This pawn is really useful in case black wants to beat the shit out of white. Pirc. The Pirc is a passive opening by black. It doesn't challenge the center with pawns but rather with pieces. More often than not, black will have a cramped position as white will take advantage of the slow play by black to claim space in the center. It is a decent opening that is perfect to surprise a stupid opponent who doesn't study openings. Philidor defense. The Philidor is a meh opening. By passively defending the e5 pawn with his own pawn, black retains a decently solid structure at the cost of delayed development. It is playable, but I personally wouldn't recommend it unless your elo is super low, in which case opening doesn't really matter as much. King's Gambit. The King's Gambit is one hell of an opening, not because it is good, don't get me wrong, but rather because it is a shit show. By sacrificing one of the most important kingside pawns on the second move, white tries to wreak havoc on the board. At lower levels, white normally grabs back the pawn due to stupid play by black, achieving a great position. However, as your opponents become smarter, you're pretty much f***ed as soon as you play it.
Please help me.
Polish. The Polish opening is the better-looking cousin of the Grob. By playing b4 on the first move, white prepares to fianchetto the c1 bishop while also claiming space on the queen side. However, due to it being way too early, the b4 pawn is more of a target than an asset. Honestly, if someone ever plays this against you online, they're probably just trolling. Benoni. The Benoni defense is a way for black to respond against 1d4 in a more aggressive manner. By challenging the center with a flank pawn, black leads the game to an unbalanced state in order to play for a win. A lot of the times, white will advance the pawn to d5, and black will exchange that pawn with a 6. When this happens, the c4 square is a very contested territory, as white will try to place a knight there, while black will try to prevent it from happening. Smith-Morra. The Smith-Morra is the best gambit in Sicilian by far. By sacrificing a pawn, white gains a huge lead in development, which in turn leads to a high attack potential. If black messes up at any point, white will easily capitalize on that, and soon emerge victorious. Hippo. The Hippo is a defensive setup that consists of putting the pieces below the middle ranks. By fianchettoing both bishops and by having a solid pawn structure, black waits for an opportunity to strike. This setup is not that ambitious but can certainly prove great against impatient opponents. Fried liver. The fried liver is a normal Italian game that suddenly went shit. From a seemingly okay position, white starts sacrificing pieces and takes black's king to a walk through hell. This trap is of such effectiveness that once activated will leave black wishing that he had never decided to learn chess in the first place. Danish Gambit. The Danish Gambit is the untalented brother of the Smith-Morra. Although it follows the same principle of getting a development lead as its sibling, it isn't quite as good due to the fact that black can already develop his bishop, whereas in the Morra, he can only develop his queen. Scandinavian defense. The Scandinavian defense is a pretty decent opening. Although black goes against all principles and develops his queen early on, it isn't really that much of a problem due to the fact that it will either go back to its starting square or settle nicely in a5. Normally in this opening, white will go for d4 and castle kingside, whilst black will castle queenside and play for the center. Alekhine's defense. The Alekhine's defense is a weird opening. Instead of playing normal useful moves, black rage baits white with his knight, jumping to a new square every time white decides to attack it. After white gets tired of bullying that knight, black starts the counterattack with d6 and develops all his pieces. Fred. In the Fred defense, black develops his king and starts trash-talking his opponent. It looks kinda similar to the Bongcloud and is equally disrespectful, which is why a lot of players fell in love with it. Since you're probably a low elo player, I highly recommend giving this a try as you probably lose all your games anyway, so why not lose while mocking your opponent? Jerome Gambit. The Jerome Gambit is a gambit of not a pawn, but rather of the entire game. This opening was probably born because some trash 700 elo player confused the fried liver with this and tried it anyway. Although it seems like white will get the piece back and enjoy a bad but existing attack, black can simply protect the piece with his king and refuse to give it away. Sodium attack. The sodium attack is a poor attempt at an excuse by a chemistry enthusiast that plays chess. The name comes from the first move, knight to a3, which in its annotation form is sodium on the periodic table. Even though this opening is just a joke, it is much better than the stupid Fred or Jerome gambit, and is actually playable. So, yeah. Give it a try, I guess?